taking your questions. I would like to highlight the fact that the G20 meeting held here was held in a specific context where multilateralism were more important than ever when you look at matters like climate change and the great changes that we are faced with. So multilateralism is going through a real crisis and is shaken up by multiple crises. In this respect, this G20 meeting allowed us to have in-depth exchanges on very important matters and several ones, and allowed us to produce concrete results. On trade, we produced, as I wished in May of last year at OECD, we produced an agenda for reforming the organization by setting ourselves the calendar, which was with a deadline, with the next G20 meeting in Japan, and having a schedule by then. So the ministers of economy and finance will be busy in the next few months. We hope that the modernization of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is absolutely necessary, and that the work that is done at the OECD in order to modernize the WTO is one of the necessary steps to enhance our multilateralism in the matter of trade. The work we put in the last few days showed the necessity of having this modernization, and everybody seems to converge on this point. Actually, we confirmed our unanimous commitment to a multilateral system that is rules-based, and that's important too. Regarding climate now, our red line was the support given to climate reforms from the 19, i.e. the G20 minus the US. And we have this commitment. Our commitment is a commitment to set new rules, starting at COP24 in Katowice tomorrow, and finding new ways of reacting to the major threats on IPCC. We had many intense discussions on climate matters, and there was no recession on the matter during the G20 meeting. This is what we feared, and we managed to remobilize all the initiatives, having a more explicit declaration than we had a year ago, and in particular the ministerial process to set our objectives and to increase our objectives. Then we had several discussions to prepare the COP meeting, COP24 in Poland, and I hope that all Europeans will be able to state that they've risen their objectives at this occasion. And also we managed to clarify a few financing matters with the Secretary General of the UN and the World Bank for countries like Turkey, which were particularly interested in this matter, and rightly so. On climate, I would like to say two things that are aside from the negotiation on the communiqué. We signed, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs from France, China, and the UN Secretary General signed a joint text reaffirming our common commitment with the very broad lines that are more ambitious than what has been done previously. And this shows China's commitment to fighting climate change and the good work that we've been doing together. France and China, work that was revamped in January of last year. We held a meeting with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Secretary General of the UN, to define a working method. In September 2019, there will be a new summit in New York upon the initiative of the UN Secretary General, and Jamaica and France are jointly together mobilizing both public and private funds for this purpose. So we decided on a schedule and a method for this. We consider that this G20 on trade matters is up in line with our expectations, and we managed to reach our objective. Other elements that were priorities for France were met by all priority for education for young girls. This is a priority for France, and it is high up on our agenda. At the beginning of this year in Dakar, we took part with President Sali to a global partnership for education and a new roundtable for financing. And secondly, we managed to reorganize reconstitute the Global Fund against AIDS, and this is something important for health. The main message of the summit is that Europe is making its voice heard as a united Europe. And I said so before the beginning of the G20 meeting. I held a coordination meeting with all of the member countries and invited countries and different representatives of European institutions so that we could specify what we were going to say on climate and specify our common stance. I'm going to take an element that goes to show our collective credibility and goes to show our collective will to move forward. I really believe that if Europe does not defend collectively its interests and its stakes, that our voice will become inaudible and we will not be heard. I very sincerely believe that these results were only possible as a result of Europe's unity. It's the first time that a G20 meeting opened on a coordinated initiative on our behalf to carry a common message, and I think it's important. Europe needs to heighten or to increase its ambition on climate matters and on trade-related matters. We want to go further. We want to do more. That's why we want to modernize WTO. And that's why I want the European Union to increase its commitment between now and 2020, and in particular in its contribution to the Paris Agreement. I think this is what Europeans will probably be working on and doing in Katowice in the next few days. I would like to highlight that this international and European resolute action is no way a luxury for our country. It is in line with France's interests. First of all, because it contributes to an international agenda that we've set for ourselves, in which we state our values and our interests, and we're going to have to defend them next year. France will be chairing the G7 meeting at the end of August in Biarritz, and this G20 meeting allowed us to coordinate with many of our partners that are members of the G7 or partners that we would like to rig in to the future meeting in Biarritz. And it also allowed us to actually pass on testimonies to Canada. In terms of concrete advancements, trade advancements, these are very, very concrete, very matter-of-fact. We're talking about our industries, and when we talk about trade with President Macron, I'm talking about the openness of our markets and our agriculture and what is of our interest of all of our economies. When I talk climate with the Chinese president and the partnership we developed, I defend the Paris Agreement, but this is also a direct extension of our climate ambitions and what France is doing for ourselves when we coordinate and discuss and sit around the table and discuss energy to reduce the energy consumption and have the lowest rates for crude oil, which is one of the things that were discussed at these G20 meetings. It's, of course, in the interest of our citizens. So when we're talking about the stability, we just got this with the Japanese Prime Minister. We're talking about the French industry and employment in France. There are no two planets or no two worlds. If we defend our own interests, I think it's a concrete endeavor, and this is something that we did here during the past 2 days at the G20 and previously during our bilateral meeting here in Argentina. This is what I'll carry on doing with the same clarity and the same commitment. In conclusion, I would like to say 3 things. First of all, I would like to thank President Macron, and I would like to thank President Macron and congratulate him. Not only did he give us a very warm welcome, and he made a tremendous success of this G20 meeting through his presidency. And then I would like to say a few words about the passing of President Bush. I extended my condolences to President Trump and the family of former President Bush. So because I will not answer any question on the violences in France, I would like to tell you more about it now. What happened in Paris today has absolutely nothing to do with a peaceful demonstration of a legitimate unhappiness or discontent. But this does not justify that public buildings be set afire, that journalists be threatened, or that the Arc de Triomphe be tagged. The authors of these violences do not want change. They don't want any improvement. They just want to wreak chaos. And they betray the causes that they're pretending to serve. They will be identified, and they will be held responsible for their actions, and they will be taken to court. As soon as tomorrow morning, when I get back to Paris, I called a meeting with the Prime Minister, the Minister of the Interior, and all of the services involved. Now, I will always respect those who disagree, and I always will hear any dissent, but I will never accept violence. I will now take your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. A question from BFM Television. At the meeting with the French people in Buenos Aires, you said you would not step back on your policy. So the French people would like to know how you will answer this crisis. Well, I just answered this question. A question on behalf of C News. On the same topic, if you allow me, you did not manage to convince all of your partners around the table, including the President of the United States. And as a matter of fact, there are different versions of this word, as we can see in France as well on the street. Is there a political answer to these protests on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, here in France, in the United States? Is it difficult to handle? Together with Donald Trump, we very much found an agreement. The United States of America has approved a text on multilateralism, a clear text, and a multilateralism that complies with international rules. They've approved a clear text on trade, which has been discussed at length and is very clear as to the reform of the WTO, which is our common goal. They've approved a common text as well on energy matters. And this morning, President Trump took the floor in a plenary session in order to say that even though he did not follow the Paris Accord, he very much wanted to be involved on climate matters. And as in Hamburg, and that is not surprising, they simply repeated that they were no longer in the Paris Accord. So I actually consider that these discussions, the G20, and as well the discussions we had together in the margin of the commemoration on the 11th of November, allow us to build a consensus. And notwithstanding our disagreements on a number of topics, we managed to put together some concrete and common path, as was the case at this G20. And I've answered the other question.
Hello, Daniel Politi with the New York Times. Two questions quickly. If you could speak briefly about, not the violence per se, but I wonder if you could talk about what you attribute the anger on the streets in Paris today, and whether you think that your government hasn't done enough to respond to it. And beyond that, with G20, you talked a little bit about Prince Mohammed, and we all saw the video of you talking to him yesterday. I wonder if you got a chance to see the report that came out today about his contacts with the alleged authors of the murder of journalist Khashoggi. If you feel like he lied to you yesterday, if you feel like he told you the truth, if you could expand a little bit on what he told you and what you expect from him now after the exchange that you had with him yesterday. Thank you.
La première question,
as to the first question, I talked about it in France earlier this week in details, and I explained what could be the interpretation of this crisis, and I also made some comment a minute ago. As to the contacts and the discussions I had with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, I strictly told him in which respect I wanted some cooperation on three topics. First of all, we all want clarity as to the facts, what happened in the Khashoggi case. And we need a very credible international investigation. There is an ongoing investigation in Saudi Arabia, another one in Turkey. Our willingness is that the outcome of these investigations be fully credible. We therefore need some transparency and cooperation mechanisms to that effect. He took note of it, and I was not expecting any further from him at this point in time. As to the war in Yemen, I once again expressed our willingness to obtain a political outcome to this conflict. And I discussed this matter with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, like I did with the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, who was in Paris not long ago. And I said we also needed to increase the humanitarian assistance to the civil population. We held a conference in Paris in November, and I would like us to strengthen the European actions and the partnerships to that effect. He once again took note of that, but we now need some concrete results. Lastly, we also expressed a very clear message of coordination regarding the international program and the cooperation as to the oil prices. The topic was also discussed in a plenary session yesterday. It's still ongoing.
De Telefe Bahía Blanca, Argentina.
President Macron, Douglas Lavamero. Sorry, I'm over here. I haven't seen you. I'm going to speak Spanish if you don't mind. So, I want to know whether after this G20 there were major possibilities of having an agreement between Mercosur and the European Union, and if you were going to try to persuade Bolsonaro to have such agreement.
Nous avons eu en début d'année avec le président Macron une discussion extrêmement franche et
Earlier this year in France, I had a very concrete and frank discussion with President Macron on Mercosur. France has priorities. We have a number of sectors in which we want our interests to be protected, and they've always been defended by the European Commission and respected by our partners, including by Argentina, like I said to President Macron. Some modest progress has been made recently, but it is clear that the election of President Bolsonaro brings about a new situation. It's not for me to comment. It's for President Bolsonaro to clarify things when the time comes. As far as I'm concerned, France will not support agreements with countries that do not support the Paris Accord. For an obvious reason, we cannot ask our fellow citizens, our industries, our farmers, our economic stakeholders to undertake some efforts in order to support a transition which we feel is indispensable, and on the next day sign deals with countries that want to walk away from these commitments. It is a choice that was made by Brazil, but I told President Macron that a discussion with Argentina could be considered given our outstanding cooperation and strong bilateral relation, but not necessarily within the Mercosur. Mr. President, a question from Le Figaro. Could you tell us more about this topic, which is relevant not only to the French people, but to others as well, as to oil prices? You talked about a discussion on coordination. What did Saudi Arabia, Russia, and others said, the main producing countries? Did they make any commitments as to the producing quotas? You rightly said that this was relevant, first of all, to our fellow citizens, because this is very much what we've suffered from over the past few months, an increase in oil prices. We need to keep reasonable prices and reduce volatility, because let me remind you that the prices were extremely low 3 years ago. It has been forgotten somehow, but sometimes when the prices drop sharply, this also has an impact on our industry. And, for example, a company like Vallourec in 2015 had to very much suffered the drop in oil prices because they could not extract oil anymore. So we expressed our willingness to keep the prices below what they are today, but stable prices. We have a full agreement with the President, with the United States on that. I talked about the matter briefly with President Trump on the 11th of November. We discussed the matter again last night, and this is what we have supported. Some countries were trying to obtain cooperation for an increase of the prices. Of course, this forum is not a place where to agree the oil prices, but we managed to get some clear commitments, and I hope that the message supported by France and the United States will help. What we've monitored over the past few weeks is a genuine drop, and it is now being seen by the customers, and I hope it will continue. The discussions were to that effect and have been rather constructive.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, Politico. Est-ce que vous avez pu parler avec
Good afternoon, sir. A question from Politico. Have you been able to talk with President Trump about the trade relationship between the United States and the European Union and this agreement found in July in order to keep the status quo, or are you worried about potential tariffs on the automobile sector? Next, given that I'm German, the question is to the relationship between France and Germany. Are you worried? Do you fear that the Americans might try to bring division within the European Union, either by targeting the automotive industry in Germany or threaten to target the agricultural sector in France? Thank you. Well, overnight we had a discussion with President Trump and Chancellor Merkel and myself on this topic and others. We know what the stances are, and we're hoping to find a positive solution. We consider that there is no tariff at the moment, which is, we would like no tariffs that would bring about an unfair situation for our economies. Sometimes we need some small corrections, and that's fine. But once again, we said where we stand, and of course I did pay attention to the statements made by President Trump, but of course, I would not pretend that together with Chancellor Merkel we managed to convince President Trump. But some discussions have on their way, led by the President of the European Commission, and we're ongoing also at this G20 and will continue. And I hope we can clarify things in order to calm things down and increase the international cooperation. I believe I can say that the trade deficits that exist either on the European or the American side are not due to tariffs. They are due to the way our sectors are organized, or because there is one side or the other is more competitive. And as a matter of fact, France suffers from a lack of competitiveness, and we're working on it. But I do not think that it is by being more aggressive on trade matters that we would solve the problem. And I think the same goes for the United States of America. So I very much hope that negotiation and cooperation will help us find a solution, and we've been working to that end. And that being said, I can't tell you what the United States will decide and do. That being said, I understand that of course, the President and the Congress each have their own powers, and that this has some consequences on the economic situation. But we are regularly in touch, and we have this ability to work of all these topics in very concrete terms, and I hope we can continue on this efficient cooperation path. But today, once again, I would like to express our solidarity with President Trump and the American nation, given what has happened. It's very important, given what both our nations share. The question from Europe 1, you received on the 11th of November so many countries at the Arc de Triomphe, and we are aware that the place has been tagged today. And this G20 has been extremely protected as well. Don't you feel there is somehow a disconnection between the people, or at least a difficulty for the leaders to talk to their peoples? Like I said, my willingness is to have a dialogue which is as efficient as possible. And I explain how these summits, this coordination between leaders bring about some concrete results. We should start upside down. Without such summits and in the absence of coordination, what would happen? For sure, a state of war, trade war, environmental war, and probably a geopolitical war as well. So, of course, we can always say that these summits and these international discussions are useless. But have in mind that this coordination did not exist at some point in time, and that at the time it was much more difficult. So I've been very concrete. I talked about industry, trade, oil, our industries, our jobs in France, our environment, because this is our daily life. And France, you know, France is 0.9% of global emissions. We have to do our job. But unless we convince our partners, unless we do what we're doing with China, and constantly so, all we've been doing since COP21 in Paris. As you know, COP21 has been extremely successful, and President Hollande at the time managed to build this partnership with many others, including the Chinese president. Unless we continue, we can't change the world. But if France is being successful thanks to its leadership on environmental matters, because France is telling everyone that the environment is our day-to-day life. People die on a daily basis due to pollution. So it's concrete, it's real, it's now. And if we do so, and if we manage to concrete other partners who represent a major part of emissions around the world, then we can change things. And this is what we've been doing yesterday by signing this agreement. So it's very important that these countries can move together. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of time. Texts which sometimes are very hard to read because they are the outcome of some technical compromises. But that being said, I'm deeply convinced that these meetings are useful because we can see what can be achieved. And it's not necessarily obvious. You can't say it in one day or one statement. Sometimes there are some highlights, but to understand what is happening, you have to look at it in the longer run. That being said, we can see when we're losing ground. So we shall try not to lose ground. Of course, we have to explain things. And indeed, for a very long time, these international summits have been challenged and criticized. It's not new, and I believe it's mainly due to ultra-mondialist views. I know it exists. I know how violent it can be. We remember how violent it was in Hamburg last year, which was totally unacceptable. But here again, I think we have to be careful when one speaks of the entire people by just looking at the violence of a few. The peoples, we are the peoples, all of us. I believe in that the people is not just a minority, a violent minority which can do the worst, as we've seen in the margins of this summit. We have leaders, decision makers, intellectuals, journalists. All of us are responsible. We can't simply, there is the people on the one side and we on the other. We are the peoples. It's for us to better inform people, to educate people, to explain and see where we want to go. Do we want to change things or not? What are the projects? And of course, the elections in a democracy enable us
Une grande confusion et que cette confusion ne mène pas
to make decisions.
part.
Otherwise,
Une dernière
it's
question.
only the chaos. Question, what are you going to do if Donald Trump or his administration do not stick to their commitments, the commitments taken in the final communiqué? Next, we've seen that you talked to Mohammed bin Salman.
Sur le prince
What did he tell you
J'ai répondu à votre frère
concretely?
exactement ce que je lui avais dit.
Well,
Le fait
like
qu'il
I
ait
said,
essentiellement pris acte.
the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia mainly took due note, and then it will be for him to bring about to the international community some clarity. This is very much what I'm hopeful. We need clarity on this. After what happened, I did not rush to hasty decisions. I wanted to understand first. It is now for him to bring about all the necessary clarity. And I hope it will be the case in the coming days or weeks. Next, as to the American administration and President Trump. President Trump attended the session, the closing session. He did not express any dissenting opinion, to use an American expression. The only dissent is in the text, as it were in Hamburg, given that the United States said once again that they are no longer part of the Paris Accord. That being said, he insisted on the importance of the fight against climate change, and I thought this was very important. Now, I will not speculate. His team negotiated. He was there. We shall continue to work together on that. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the best.